Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-In-Chief of the Washington Examiner. We're going to have a look again at the presidential campaign and the contest between Vice President Kamala Harris, who has just become the candidate for the Democrats after President Biden's withdrawal from the race, against Donald Trump. Both sides are in a kind of testing out phase to try and work out exactly what this campaign is now about. Donald Trump has some worries about his own vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, and has also recently repudiated Project 2025, which the Democrats were trying to tag him with. But Kamala Harris is also trying various different ways to campaign, and one of the first was that she decided, and all the Democrats decided together, that they were going to call the Republican ticket weird. Now, here to discuss this and other matters with me is Byron York. Byron is political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Byron, tell us a little bit about how this weird thing came up and also seems now perhaps to be sliding away.
It may have crested, and I think we can all hope that it's crested. Actually, it started last week. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, one of the Democrats who's said to be on Kamala Harris's short list for vice president, was on TV, MSNBC, I think, and said that that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are just weird. And a lot of Democrats listening to that kind of liked it, and they began to repeat it. And by the weekend, you heard a lot of people in the Democratic echo chamber, that is, surrogates for the Harris campaign, members of the Harris campaign, journalists who are kind of on the Democratic cheerleading team. Everybody was calling J.D. Vance and Donald Trump weird. And so then you got some Republicans, Trump supporters pushing back, saying, no, we're not weird. I mean, look at, you've got all these photos of, men dressed in women's clothing celebrating on the White House lawn. Now that's weird. And you got this kind of stupid internet war going back and forth. But some of the Harris people believe it actually had kind of a serious purpose, in that it sent a message to women voters. And if Harris is elected, it'll be because of a gender gap with women voters. It sent a message to them that J.D. Vance is really kind of a creepy guy. Maybe you've met one in your life and you don't want to meet another one. Same for Trump. And so that's apparently what it was all about. And I'm going to make one more point, which is really extraordinary, which is that the Harris campaign apparently dumped the idea that Donald Trump presents a danger, is a threat to American democracy, in favor of calling him weird. And this is what the whole campaign had been about. And if you look at her speech in Atlanta on Tuesday night, she called him weird, but she never mentioned democracy once. And I find that just really
turned on a dime.
thing.
They've turned on a dime on this.
Absolutely.
And perhaps it's because people could look at some of the things that the Biden administration was doing, such as prosecutions against his rival and attempts to undermine the judicial branch, and particularly the Supreme Court, because it was no longer under the control of the left. And they might make different conclusions about who the real threat to democracy is. And as I understand it, the polling showed that the two sides were about even in voters' minds as to their threat from democracy. But then, Vice President Kamala Harris has now actually launched one or two videos, campaign ads. And we're going to take a look at the first one, which is really a very traditional one. Have a look at this, Byron.
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. As a prosecutor, she put murderers and abusers behind bars. As California's Attorney General, she went after the big banks and won $20 billion for homeowners. And as vice president, she took on the big drug companies to cap the cost of insulin for seniors. Because Kamala Harris has always known who she represents.
This campaign is about who we fight for. We believe in a future where every person has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead. where every senior can retire with dignity. But Donald Trump wants to take our country backward, to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and end the Affordable Care Act. But we are not going back.
So, comment on that, Byron. It was kind of upbeat. It was biographical for her, and it was very traditional. I felt like, we were sort of back in the 1980s or something.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of extraordinary for its ordinariness. I mean, there was no weird in it, and there were no memes. There was no crazy stuff. It was part introductory ad. It was part of sort of a thematic ad of pushing for this idea of freedom and we're not going to turn the clock back, and part of an attack on Donald Trump. So it was an entirely conventional, after all the stuff we just talked about the weird thing, dumping the idea of Trump being a threat to democracy. After all that, it's an absolutely, totally conventional, down the middle, Democratic campaign ad.
Yeah, so that one was familiar to people like us who've been watching campaigns for decades. It seemed had a kind of an old-fashioned traditional feel. But we're going to look at another campaign ad, which will actually strike a very familiar chord to those who've been watching what the Biden administration has been doing just recently. Let's have a look at this next ad. It's about the border crisis.
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents. Donald Trump blocked a bill to increase the number of Border Patrol agents. Kamala Harris supports investing in new technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Donald Trump blocked funding for technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Kamala Harris supports spending more money to stop human traffickers. Donald Trump blocked money to stop human traffickers. Kamala Harris prosecuted transnational gang members and got them sentenced to prison. Trump is trying to avoid being sentenced to prison. There's two choices in this election: the one who will fix our broken immigration system and the one who's trying to stop her.
So, Byron, the reason this is familiar is that it strikes me as total gaslighting. It suggests that Kamala Harris is strong on the border and Donald Trump is weak. And all of the accusations in this ad relate to one piece of legislation which Donald Trump and the Republicans opposed, which was the Langford bill, which would actually have codified the catch and release policies of the administration of which Harris is a part, and would have intensified the border crisis. It was opposed not just because it would have immediately intensified and made things worse, but because it would have allowed the Democrats in the next several years to say, hey, we've passed our border legislation. We've already fixed that. And so what the Republicans very much didn't want is to kind of pass a useless bill and then get told that they'd already fixed the problem. It's an extraordinary piece of deceitful advertising, isn't it?
It was. And she talked about it, or the issue, in her Atlanta speech, about how she was much, much tougher on the border than Donald Trump. And I was listening to this and just thinking, man, they are cocky. They are really cocky right now. This is major gaslighting going on, because it would have been a much more convincing ad if the last 3 years had not happened. And we do know that President Joe Biden, upon taking office, encouraged and allowed millions of illegal border crossers to cross into the United States and to stay. And this bill you're talking about, why did they start coming up with a bill at the beginning of 2024? Was there anything happening in 2024 that they might want to kind of clear things up on the border before people went to vote in the election? This was all gaslighting. And then when President Biden did actually impose some restrictions, which he could do all along, but claimed that he could not, actual border encounters have gone down a little bit lately. So it's all election year politics. But the big thing not to forget is, for 3 years, Biden opened the door, the flow just poured in. It is being felt in every city in America, and an enormous strain on American municipalities all across the country.
Yeah, that's right. Something that people need to remember along with that is that when President Trump left office, there were fewer illegal immigrants living in the United States than there were when he came to office. There are now more than 4 million more illegal immigrants living in the United States. Not just the encounters at the border and the people who've actually been refused, but 4 million plus who are in the United States now who were not in there, more than there were when Biden and Harris came into the White House. Okay, well, thank you very much, Byron. We're going to leave it there, and we'll leave it for another week. We'll be back to discuss more in the presidential campaign on the next time. Thanks very much.